Huh. All right. Project Herpetoculture, episode 18. I'm going to do a little tiny bit of housekeeping real quick before we get rolling, as Roy likes to call it, which I think is calling it housekeeping is a really good way to go about it. I'm Phil Leitz here with my amenable and always dynamic and handsome co-host, Roy Arthur Block of Wellspring Herpetoculture. Hi there, Roy.
Howdy.
Quick shout out to Dylan at Animals at Home, Dylan the GOAT, for hosting our show on that excellent network. And a quick shout out to Custom Reptile Habitats, our sponsor. We have a link in the show description and show notes that if you make a purchase through there, we will get a small kickback. So that helps us make improvements to the show and keep doing it and keep trying to kick some ass. With all that said, I would like to introduce our guest. He's a long-term friend of mine, somebody I consider a mentor and a good buddy, Nick Dokai. Nick, thank you so much. You rock, dude, for doing the show.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, man, of course. You doing all right? How's everything going today?
Good. Yeah, just busy doing Halloween stuff.
Oh,
Decorating
yeah,
pumpkins.
That's right. Nice. You guys carve any reptiles into some pumpkins?
No, kind of just sped through it.
Oh, okay. Yeah, for sure.
Half-assed.
He roast the pumpkin seed. Half-assed it sometimes is the way a jack-o'-lantern goes, huh?
Yeah, I just mailed it in.
Oh man. So forgive me, our wonderful listeners. I think this will be like the fourth show where I've had to make this disclaimer that I'm still recovering from this demon of a cough. So I'm going to be periodically muting my mic so I don't annoy everyone's ears with my illness. But I would like to just start by saying, I just want to say a little bit, Nick, about you, because if it wasn't for you, I probably wouldn't be herping the way I herp now. You're the person who introduced me to field herping with more than one absolutely unforgettable trip. You taught me about ethics with regard to field herping. And even before you and I became friends, you and I have a common thread in Reptilian Haven, which was like the first reptile shop here in Colorado. You worked there when I was a kid, and I worked there right after you left. And then we kind of got to know each other through crossing paths that way. And so I also just want to say thanks for doing all that, man. I mean, yeah, your friendship has been really meaningful to me for a very long time. So I appreciate that. But to get started, can you tell us a little bit about how herpetoculture started for you and where your interest in reptiles and amphibians started, where it came from, kind of like an origin story, for lack of a better term?
Yeah. Well, thanks, Phil. First of all, it means a lot. I'm glad to have known you all these years, and I'm just trying to do my part, helping share the love,
Right back at you, bro.
So yeah, it does mean a lot, man. And having like-minded people to share the hobby with is one of the big things that it's all about, right?
Absolutely. Yeah,
Definitely.
So I guess for me, it was probably, I know you guys probably get this answer a lot, but it was dinosaurs. Dinosaurs and seeing little miniature versions in the local pet stores. I'd always love to go to the pet stores and check out what they have, and they'd always have green iguanas, green anoles, various newts and stuff like that. So I'd always like to go and check them out. And eventually I convinced my mom to let me get a green anole. So that was my first reptile, and it kind of just blossomed from there. I was always out there catching stuff, just riding my bike down to the creek or the pond and see what kind of animals I could find. And I'd usually end up bringing stuff home and keep them for as long as my mom would let me. And that was sorry about that.
That's awesome that came up on the recording.
Sorry about that. So yeah, started with like bullfrogs, garter snakes, and kind of grew from there. Other local stuff, and just catching and keeping stuff. And then we'd go on family road trips, and I'd kind of do the same thing. I'd grab a field guide and see what was going to be in the area, and see what as many species as I could find and identify. And
Nice.
that the opportunity to travel kind of grew and grew as I got a little older too. And eventually, I guess it was right after I started working at Reptilian Haven when I bumped into an old acquaintance, Scott Patterson. And we got to talking about collared lizards and the American deserts, and he said that there was a trip coming up, and he invited me on this trip. And I'd never done anything like that, as far as like a herp centric road trip where that's all you do is you're just catching reptiles and amphibians. So I think that was a big stepping stone as well. I joined him and Randy Cordero on that trip, and we met up with some other guys, and just all over Arizona, Southern California, and that really kind of became an obsession for me over the next few years. And I went down a lot with various different herpers, and kind of just learned the ropes of the deserts down there.
Was that the trip where you had your first infamous date shake?
Yes. Got my first date shake. You're not initiated until you get a date shake.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Roy,
Okay,
have you
so tell me more. What does this mean? Elaborate, please.
Well, so they grow dates down there in some of these areas. Like the Imperial Valley is one of the big areas where they produce domestic dates, and they blend them up and put them in milkshakes. So it became tradition with some of those guys. Every time they go through there, they get a date shake, and everybody knew they bring them to get a date shake. So
yeah, I've had one every time I go now. I've had a date shake every time. In your honor.
Look forward to it.
Look
forward to this initiation at some point.
Hell yeah, man. We'll get you having one too, Roy, soon enough. So that's pretty cool, man. So so your parents were pretty supportive of you keeping reptiles and stuff like that? They didn't really have a problem with it?
Yeah, my mom was pretty cool about it. My mom and dad divorced when I was about 6 or 7.
Mm-hmm.
So I lived with just my mom, but she was generally pretty cool about us having pets and stuff.
Nice. Yeah, same.
We took care of the stuff.
Nice. That's awesome. And so
same thing with my mom.
Oh yeah, moms are the best, aren't they?
Yeah.
They're the
Seriously,
ones.
shout out to moms.
Yeah. Woo, holla. Let's go. Oh God, feeling really silly at the moment. But okay, yeah. So the field herping is a little bit about some of what I want to focus a little bit on and kind of unpack a little bit more. So Nick, can you? So I know I'm super familiar with all the stuff that you've worked with over the years, but would you mind kind of just talking a little bit about some of the stuff you spent most of your time focusing on? I know that, and it doesn't have to be just Southwestern American herps. That I know that probably will also include dart frogs and a handful of other things, because you've worked with a huge number of different animals, right?
Right. Oh yeah. So I guess yeah, like you said, it's been a lot of different types of herps. The first reptiles I ever bred were northern pine snakes. So Pituophis will always have a special place in my heart. They're really cool snakes. So I've been really focused on Pituophis several times throughout my life, where I'll kind of get into them really heavy, and eventually something will happen and I get out of them, and then repeat the cycle. Kind of sucks, but something keeps bringing me back. I did a lot of work with North American turtles.
Oh, nice.
So probably my favorites were the now Glyptomus and Sculpta, the North American wood turtle. Let's see, spotted turtles, all kinds of turtles, snapping turtles, alligator snapping turtles, chicken turtles. That was a big obsession of mine for a long time. Let's see, we've had a lot of pythons, geckos, a lot of kind of just, run of the mill general exotics that almost everybody's worked with, panther chameleons, kept and bred panther chameleons, a lot of poison dart frogs. And the poison dart frog community is actually, they're probably one of the, they really have it together,
Yeah.
you can learn a lot from dart frog keepers as far as sustainable collection of new stock from the wild, farming in country, that kind of thing. There's a lot of good stuff going on in the dart frog hobby, even right now. So I guess after we got out of dart frogs, we did a lot of the North American desert lizards, or I guess they'd been there all the time. They just kind of, we really blossomed with the desert lizards, collared lizards, chuckwallas, uromastics, dabbled in some of the small monitor lizards. But yeah, eventually we pretty much got to the point where we were focusing almost entirely on collared lizards and chuckwallas.
And a pretty big range of collars, right? So can you talk about just some of the, like, within some of that, because especially with collards and chucks, and then I want to circle back to the dart frogs at some point, but with collards and chucks in particular, can you just maybe expand on that just a little more and talk more about some of the varieties of chucks that you've been passionate about over the years, and some of the varieties of collards that you've been passionate about over the years? And then if you feel like it, also you could add in a little bit about what it is about some of those that captivates you so.
Yeah, I think collared lizards are, they're one of the ideal pet lizards in my opinion, because they do come in such a range of colors and patterns. So let's see. So there's I don't even know where to start really. I'll start with probably my favorites. The Dickerson's collared lizard, Crotophytus dickersoni. They're native to a small patch of coastal Sonora, Mexico. The adult males can be kind of a deep cobalt blue with the characteristic black and white collar and some white speckles and patterning on the back. So they're really striking animals. I did have the opportunity to go see them in the wild one time.
Wow.
Nice.
And yeah, it's really something else. It's a gorgeous landscape. You're right there by the ocean, and it's something you'll never forget, seeing a bright blue lizard like that sitting on like kind of a brown or even like a reddish colored rock.
Wow.
So they're,
I've heard that oh, sorry to interrupt. I just was going to say, is it true that the coloration, they think that it potentially is related to them being against that backdrop of the ocean, that they're usually coastal? And I've heard that that's kind of a thing that you get, because they inhabit the tops of these boulders, and often there's this ocean backdrop behind them. So you have this cobalt lizard.
yeah, that's definitely one theory, one idea, and it does kind of make sense because they're, compared to some of the other species, they're actually pretty approachable, pretty mellow. So
Oh, interesting.
amazing
lizard.
Yeah, not blending it at all to the rocks is kind of, it doesn't really make sense for them to be so approachable.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's I actually have an old photo before. Well, I wouldn't consider myself a good photographer, but got a very mediocre photo of a male Dickerson with the ocean behind him. Kind of like you described. So
Awesome.
It does make sense.
That's cool. And so there was the Dickersoni, and then you have I mean, I know you've produced, like, you've bred quite a few, probably almost all of them in North America, I'd imagine, except for maybe a couple. But there were a couple other than Dickersoni. There were a few that you were quite passionate about, right?
Oh yeah, probably my second favorite would be the Vestigium, the Baja collards. Those, back to my first desert trip, that was kind of like the main prize, right? Like, they have such a limited range within the US that you go through all these deserts and you finally make it down there to about the furthest point that you're going to be from home. And it's such a small area where they exist in the US that, you know, and it's like no other place that I've been, big granite boulders.
Yeah.
And they're extremely wary. So they're kind of on the opposite end of the spectrum from Dickerson's. They're really hard to approach. They blend in. They're a little more cryptic. But that was kind of the prize of the whole trip. That was why we went.
Mhm.
So those are a special species as well. Just gorgeous lizards. Really wild.
Nice. Yeah. So the Baja for me also kind of ended up being the collared lizard that I ended up enjoying the most, and I'm sure it was, you know, significantly due to your influence. And then the chuckwall is also. Can you talk a little bit about some of the different varieties that you've messed with over the years?
Yeah. So the chuckwallers are kind of the same as the collared lizards, being divided more or less geographically into colors and patterns, right? So we only have the one species, Soromalis adder, here in the U.S., and it's generally kind of divided up into patterns or color phases. So we have the redbacks, we have like blackbacks or whitetails, where the males are almost all black with a cream to white or even yellowish tail. I've heard people call them yellow tails. We've got one carrot tails, which have a very small range south of Phoenix, basically the same as the blackbacks, where they're all black with a bright orange tail. We've got the granites, which are more of kind of a cookies and cream kind of look to them. Real light white cream color with black around the head and shoulders and the hips. Those are generally the ones that we worked with the most. Within that, we found that there were a few color morphs. Austin and I actually found a axanthic male granite, and he was already an adult when we found him. We didn't realize that he was a morph really until years after we caught him, just because it's being axanthic is not that striking of a difference to what they normally are. Kind of a high contrast cookies and cream look to them. But where you really notice that contrast is with the hatchlings,
Right?
As the hatchlings have orangish kind of peach color highlights, and you know, when you see axanthic hatchling next to a normal, it's night and day.
Right.
Just
Yeah.
really
Really
clean
cool.
contrast.
Really, really cool.
Yeah. And you know, as you know, the albino redback project with the T positive albinos, we were working with those for a while. Those are something else too, where it's the difference is quite a bit more apparent in the babies and the hatchlings, and as they age, they don't quite produce a real, you know, true dark black melanin, but some of the males do get pretty dark, and it's almost like a chocolatey brown. It's kind of hard to describe, but yeah, it's a really interesting morph as well.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. And so you spent how many years would you say focusing on or working with both Crotophytus and Soromalis?
Close to 20.
20, yeah,
But
right.
Wow.
it was at least 20. With the Crotophytus, we were breeding Crotophytus, I think, basically every year for 20 years. And I got into the chuckwallas just, I want to say, like 1 year after getting heavily involved with Crotophytus.
Nice. Wow. Fuck yeah. That's awesome. And so let's actually, I really want to, I just remembered this and I don't want to forget about it. So like, I kind of want to just ask it now, and without like leaving it behind us and forgetting about it. Can you tell us the story of that male Baja that got out, and how you found him and what he was eating when you found him?
Okay. Yeah. Yeah.
Oh
That was
yeah, yeah, yeah.
that's a good story. Um, so yeah, so Bajas are they're pretty hefty little predators, right? Compared to some of the other members of the genus, where they're more inclined to eat bugs and stuff like that. Bajas are made to almost like they're made to tackle vertebrates. You know, they eat a lot of lizards. Um, a lot of the diet in nature is kind of unknown, right? So um,
Mhm.
I got this male home, you know, a full-grown adult male, which, you know, comparatively they're pretty large collar lizards.
Mhm.
So I had this probably like a 300-gallon or so stock tank
Mhm.
uh, in my lizard room, and it was open topped because it's kind of an odd shape. It's got a lot of angles and stuff. I didn't have a lid for it, so pretty much all the lizards that I kept wouldn't be able to hop out of there. But I got this guy, put him in there in a way that had it decorated where I didn't think anything could hop out. I mean, they're astonishing jumpers, but uh, I didn't.
Bit of
I
foreshadowing
still,
here.
yeah, I
Yeah.
still didn't think he could get out. But I put him in there, and about 5 minutes later, I was setting up another lizard that I collected on that trip, and I walked by, and it's the middle of the day, and he's not out. So I figured it's a little early for him to call it a day, right? So I start looking at the hide spots, and he's not in there. So I start looking. You know, he couldn't have gotten far. So I started looking around, and I'm not seeing him anywhere. You know, he's not under any of the racks or anything like that. Uh, I go back over to his cage, and I kind of look over to the left. There's a window well. We're down in the basement, right? So um, the ledge of the window well is about the same height as the top of the stock tank. So he must have hopped up there, and I had the windows open, being summertime. Uh, he found a little hole in the screen, got out there, and when I saw him, he was he was he was a few inches deep into swallowing. Probably the previous season's baby garter snake. Yeah. So I took a bunch of pictures. Took a whole series of pictures of him. You know, as I found him from the basement, then I went upstairs from the outside and took a picture from out there, and then gently put him back in his cage and finished the photo shoot of him swallowing the whole snake.
Amazing.
That's incredible.
So
I've seen those pictures too. Those are some remarkable images. You don't think he's going to be able to eat that much of a snake, but my God, he
yep.
really makes it happen.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, it's really amazing what some of these lizards can do. Like, yeah, Crotophytus come to mind, and also like the crown giant anoles come to mind too,
Oh
that
yeah.
also will eat other lizards. And sometimes I've seen these images, and it's just like, how is that possible? But they do it. You know, it's
Hmm.
mind-boggling in a way.
Didn't Armin Kulian just post? I think he just shared photos because okay, if I'm not, I just saw this today. I honestly don't know
Uh-huh.
the whole story, but if I think what happened was Armin posted a video of him feeding an Anolis smallwoodi a big Madagascan hissing cockroach, big one, really
Whoa.
large.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
I think he caught a little bit of flack for feeding such a large prey item, you know, because there's that sort of
Yeah, of course.
prevailing concept that you shouldn't give a lizard too big a food item or whatever. And so he shared in counter to that two images, and one of them was of a small woodeye eating an iguana, like a baby iguana.
Yeah, yeah. So I've seen those images. I think I know who those came from, probably.
Yeah, I think so too.
Probably our mutual friend John, who works with, I think, almost exclusively crown giants is kind of his thing. And he posted, yeah, some images of a small woodeye eating a baby iguana a while back. And it's just like, when I first saw them, I was like, oh my gosh, like
Monsters, dude.
how is it possible? But I mean, again, they do it, you know.
Yeah.
I mean, I had the same experience the first time I offered the Polycris a mantid. I offered them a full grown Chinese mantid, and the feeding response was like they knew exactly what to do.
Oh
You know,
yeah.
like they they were really calculated about the way they grabbed it. So they grabbed it in such a way that the raptorial forelegs were caught in the
Right.
jaws of the lizard, so it couldn't fight back. And then they
Right.
just chomped and chomped and chomped until it stopped moving, and swallowed this huge mantid. I mean, snout to vent length, the difference between the mantid and, you know, the snout to vent length of the lizard was an inch, maybe.
Oh wow, Jesus
You
Christ.
know, like it wasn't a big difference at all in terms of
No.
the length of the creatures, and no problems digesting it or anything.
And
It's
and
amazing.
also you've been feeding phasmids to your polychrus also,
Yeah.
right? And those
Yeah,
things
same
are
thing.
substantial.
Yeah, they're big. Yeah, they're, I mean, some of these phasmids are 4 inches long, and that's about the size of a snout to vent length on the male polychrus I have. He's about 4 inches snout to vent, and he'll take down a phasmid that size.
Crazy. Wow.
It's wild.
Yeah, that's a
Some of
great
these species are just really well adapted for that. You know, same thing with like Corydophanes, like that Eric works with. They'll take down huge prey items too. And I think it's, I mean, obviously it's different with collards, but with some of these species, I think it's like slow, sedentary ambush predators. Like I think the polychrus are like that, and the Corydophanes are like that, where they're not necessarily eating all the time, but when they eat, they make it count. You know, they
Yeah.
hit something big.
Yeah.
They don't have the same metabolic productivity that a collard does, but similar
Right.
capacity to take down big prey items.
Yeah, for sure. I'm gonna refill real quick. Do you mind, Roy?
Mhm.
Would you mind? All right, cool. Hang on.
Go for it.
Yeah.
Nick, I'm curious, did you also keep Bicentories?
Yeah, I did. Yeah, a few times. Got in and out of them. They were always kind of one of the ones that we enjoyed working with them, but they were always kind of the casualty of needing space.
Yeah, totally.
I was one of the first ones to go if we really needed it. They are an
Yeah.
interesting species.
Yeah, I feel like they're a really underrated species in the Crotophytus genus. I really like them. I had them for a while when I was a teenager, and
Oh yeah.
really enjoyed working with them.
Yeah, me too. I got a pair on that very first trip that I went to when they came from Southern California. They were really nice, pretty classic looking ones. One of the guys that we went out with, he knew of a spot where, I guess the prevailing theory was that they had hybridized at one point long ago with Colaris. So
Oh,
they're
wow.
kind of an interesting looking population, definitely a little different, and you can see the subtle traits where they have a little bit of that Colaris influence, right?
Wow.
Those were really cool as well. I really enjoyed those probably the most out of all of the Bicentories.
Yeah, that sounds really cool. I'll have to
Mhm.
see if I can find some images of those. I'd be curious to see what they look like.
Which ones?
Phil's he's worked with the locale as well. I think those are the only
Yeah.
bison he's had. But
Oh yeah.
Cool.
Yeah.
a lot of blue on the throat. Some of them have blue spots that kind of creep up to the top of the head.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay. Yeah. So I've seen these. Yeah, I know what you're talking about.
They're
Very cool.
beautiful.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Big old honking heads, man. That's one of the coolest things about collards to me is those big meat triangles, that are their heads. It's like these
Oh yeah.
vicious raptors. They're so
They've
sick.
just got that jaw strength. You can
Yeah.
just see it. You see them, and you don't want to feel that bite.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, no, it hurts. Like,
That feels right.
yeah, that's true.
That's right.
Oh,
Phil
yeah.
doesn't like to get bit by stuff. I forgot.
Oh yeah.
Oh, I hate it. I used to, like, Nick has seen me in the field just be like, dude, will you do it? I know if I grab this lizard at this point, it's gonna bite me. Will you do it? He's like, you pussy. And he just does it. It's awesome. I'm a big wuss. My hands are screwed up from jujitsu. I don't need them to get any more
Yeah, you
throttle.
don't need it to get any worse.
Just
Yeah.
exactly. Yeah.
That's how I do my health checks on the Xenosaurus. Is I just go noodling for them because they're so bitey that I can just kind of reach my fingers into a crevice and just pull out a Xenosaurus.
No way. Really do that?
It's easier than taking apart their crevices. Do you hear?
Absolutely.
Do you guys hear that, by the way, that the wolf? Okay,
No.
that's good
No, I haven't heard anything.
right now. So
I'm sorry about my coughing yet again.
that's all right.
That's yeah. So Nick, I want to talk. So one of the things that I've always admired about the way you keep your stuff, there's a few things. One is that you are very, very good about what I've always watched you try new stuff. So, like whether it was coming over one day and seeing you having stacked a bunch of tiles on top of one another and you hot glued rocks as little legs so you could create these sort of modified stacks for chuckwallas and whether it's that or the way you used to make nests for your crotophytus, which is a few bricks that kind of frame against one end of a wall, fill it with moist sand, and then lay a tile over the top, and then block the entrance with all these smaller stones to prevent sand from being kicked out. I mean, this is just a bunch, there's a lot more than just that. Can you talk a little bit about how you like the way you think about trying new things with regard to your keeping, and then also if this is sort of adjacent to that, how all your time spent field herping has affected the way you keep?
Yeah. I'd say it's for any keeper, you need to have an open mind, right? You have to be able to make adjustments, try new things, trial and error, right?
Yeah.
Some of these things, especially, some of the crotophytus stuff, well, chuckwallas too, they're not really like mainstream, so you don't have a whole lot of people to kind of tell you exactly what to do, right? So trial and error and trying to find new ways of doing things or better ways of doing things. And I guess having issues is going to drive the need for that. Some of the old school methods, we knew were clearly outdated, so we needed to find, I guess, some better ways to do things.
What are some of those old school methods that you would say are outdated?
Well, I mean, when I first started keeping crotophytus, you know, I was mentored by some guys that they did things one way or in their way, and they kind of had the if it isn't broken, don't fix it kind of mentality, and it worked for them, and that's fine. And it's fine until it isn't. If you start having issues where it's not working for you anymore, then you gotta change things up, right? So, first of all, the UVB lights weren't nearly as strong as they are now, to the point where for collared lizards and chuckwallas, they had the light fixtures laying in the cage, where the lizards would literally they'd come up and they'd lay on them.
Oh man, that's so silly.
Yeah.
Wow.
But from there to the supplementation to, maybe being taught one way where, my main mentor with the collared lizards, he would syringe water his lizards, every couple of days or whatever. He'd walk by and he just, he had a smaller collection, so it was totally feasible for him to do that, right? But if you have a bigger collection and you're shorter on time, you got to figure out different ways of doing things, right?
Yeah.
So collared lizards can be tricky in that a lot of them don't drink out of water dishes, just standing water, and on top of that, a lot of them will make a big mess of the water dish, tracking sand in there or just spilling it. So using, I guess, a misting system from my poison dart frog keeping days, just modified that to just be a drip system on a timer where it just dripped on the flat rocks or into a shallow dish, once every other day or so.
That's great. And they would use that, right?
Yep. Oh yeah.
Yeah.
They'd see that water dripping and come running.
It's cool how they kind of get trained in a way to recognize that stuff, like the fact that one of your mentors could train them with a dripper. And I mean, so many animals he had were wild caught, right? I mean, or at least some of them.
Yeah. He's he was always good at taming stuff down. Like he would make a point to work with them to the point where they were hand tame.
Pretty fearless.
Mhm.
Yeah, yeah, it's good. Some of my lizards, I want them to be assholes, you know.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, we were just talking about this. This was on we in the conversation we had earlier today
Yeah,
with
totally.
Jordan. You know, he was talking about how there are some similarities between herpetoculture and aviculture, and how with certain birds, some of them you would see occasionally where, you know, birds that were super tame and hand fed and imprinted and what have you wouldn't grow up to be as effective breeders. And
Right.
Mhm.
you know, I feel like I know Nick, you and I have kind of talked a little bit about this, that I feel like a good Euromastix is a sassy one. You know what I
Mhm.
mean? Like
Yeah.
I like Euromastix when they're a little spicy and have a little bit of pith in them, and don't want to just let you pick them up. They don't want to be puppies. I feel like that gets them a little, you know, just a little cranked up and stuff, right?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And I mean, so I know
Yeah.
that sorry, Roy, go ahead.
Oh no, I was just gonna expand on that a little bit. That I also feel like that's kind of one of the merits of herpetoculture that I see on some level, is that like you have this kind of intermediate kind of relationship with animals. Like it's different than like a, you know, a dog or a cat that wants your attention. Well, you know, cats are a little bit ambiguous on that sometimes,
Yeah.
but you know, with reptiles, it's like they are closer to that wild, intact type, you know. And I think
Yeah.
that there's merit to people having, you know, in our domestic civilized lives, having that kind of experience with another creature,
Yeah.
that is still a little wild, you know, and that will still put you in your place.
Right.
I definitely appreciate that, you know. And I've got some of the sulfurious here will definitely let me know if they don't want me, you know, changing the water bowl that day or whatever. You know,
Yeah.
they'll go right for the face. They don't care.
Right. Yeah.
But that's okay with me. It's
You
okay.
don't need your face anymore. It's just it's not,
Yeah, I don't need that.
yeah, it's not important. Yeah, you don't need that.
Podcasts are only for audio, right?
Yeah, yeah, so true. So true. So another, you know, there's another thing too, Nick, that I remember from some of our early herb trips, which was you would have a notebook that you'd bring with you. And this notebook, you know, each morning when we'd be eating breakfast, or sometimes at night when we get home to the hotel, you know, maybe it was before we went out night herping or what have you, you would sit down and take meticulous notes in this notebook. And could you talk a little bit about some of the stuff you would record in your notebooks?
Yeah. I think it's good stuff for keeping, but also for future success in the field, right? So
Mhm.
um it's mostly what you saw, where you saw it, when you saw it, what the temperatures were like. I know that there's always conversations about night hunting,
Mhm.
where you know some people say like, oh, you can't find anything on a full moon.
Mhm.
Um, Other people, you know, say differently.
Yeah.
So that goes to night hunting as well, right? Like, what was the approximate temperature? What was the moon phase? That kind of thing. So these are the things that I was writing down, and I guess I don't know if it stems from wanting to uh, write it down and maybe publish something someday, or uh, you know, I had a really bad run uh, where I just wasn't finding what I wanted to find, right? So um, you can find, uh, sorry, fruit fly.
Oh, it's okay. Yeah.
um, you can find uh, ways to fail, I guess, that could teach you as well as succeeding, right? So um, finding stuff or not finding stuff can be just as helpful, or I guess rather, not finding things can be just as helpful as finding things. But
Mm.
you know, I went
Mhm.
through a stretch of probably several years where I was going out, you know, twice a year, driving down to Southern California and mostly looking for Bajas, right? And you know, not seeing all that much. And I'm sure that the weather patterns had a lot to do with that as well. But you know, you got to sit down and figure out what you're doing wrong, right? So um, just documenting what you were seeing, what was going right, and when you did see stuff, you know, what were the conditions like, and then you try and replicate that, you know.
Mhm.
But also it's part of that is also goes back to the trial and error, right? Trying to change something up and see if it's better or worse, right? Record your results and go from there.
Mm.
Mhm.
Yeah, because I think this is something, you know, when I saw you doing so much of that and some of the other sort of captive practices that you were employing every day with all your stuff. I mean, you're very committed, and it was something that I really admired, and it was something that I hadn't really seen before, at least not in the same way. I'd heard a lot of people talk about the importance of record keeping, but I had rarely seen anybody employ that. And I think sometimes it's a little bit sometimes people can take it a little bit for granted. Um, you know, I still feel like a huge number of people that I meet don't really take all that meticulous notes. And I'm not suggesting that anybody really has to, right? Because there's lots of different ways to be successful in what we do. Um, but I think people kind of take it for granted, the utility and the value that can come from all that record keeping, you know. Um, even in my own work with Euros, if I hadn't been keeping really clear notes about, you know, when stuff came up from cooling, when it went down for cooling, what temperature changes happened when they went down and when they came up. Um, how many, when stuff decided to mate, what was going on before they started mating, um, how many, how long it was between when they mated and when they laid their eggs, how that varied from year to year, from animal to animal, from species to species, how many eggs that were laid, how many eggs that hatched, how many eggs were duds when they were laid, how long the eggs took to hatch, at what temperature, and then, what sex ratios came out of that if you kept them for long enough. I mean, I think all of these notes and records, it's sort of like data visualization. People can really pick up a lot from that stuff, but I don't think as many people keep as detailed notes about what's going on in their own facilities. Or at least that's my impression. I don't know. Was that something that you felt like you were wanted to do from the start, or was there an influence that drove you to do that?
Um, I think I've always kind of been like that,
Mhm.
but
Yeah.
again, like I said, necessity kind of drives that, right? If you're not having the kind of success that you think you should be, you got to start analyzing, what's wrong, and you have to have a starting point, right? So uh, start figuring out what you are doing and taking tangible measurements and go from there.
Yeah. I mean, but I guess I don't know. I feel like that's actually kind of a bit of a unique quality in you and other high level keepers, man. Like there there are a lot of people who don't keep that very detailed of notes, who will
Mhm.
see certain results and they'll make an inference based on those results. But, because they weren't keeping these detailed notes, maybe it was easy for them to make a mistake in their interpretation. And I feel like that's
Mhm.
actually kind of a unique thing. I feel like you have, over the years, I've seen you make very, very clear, pointed decisions that allowed you to be very objective in the way that you view the practice of herpetoculture. I mean, when I think about herpetoculture as a whole, I feel like most people's notes have to do with really, really baseline objective data, like some of the stuff I
Mhm.
was just mentioning, like how many eggs were laid, how many hatched, what the results were, if there was any kind of gene involved, and that's kind of it. But watching you go out and note the temperature, the time of day, the time of year, the weather, where you found the animal, what conditions, how the animal responded when you approached,
hmm
that was enriching to me. That was so, um, I found that very motivational and inspirational. Like, because I do that still to this day. Now, when I go out, I see something, I take note of it. I write it
uh,
down. I have a herping journal, and I pay attention to what's going on all the time. And I feel like a lot of that's led to me saying, okay, I saw Chuck Wallace doing this thing in Arizona or down in Southern California. Let me see if the Euros will do that. you know,
Uh-huh.
like, let me
Mhm.
see how that affects the Euros, you know? And I feel like,
Mhm.
you, you have displayed a kind of, dedication to really rigid, uh, logical methods, and also a willingness to experiment and be open-minded. That's not necessarily a it's not like it's a common thing. I don't think that many people do that. And I don't necessarily have a specific question that's wrapped up in this. Maybe Roy can expound on this, but I really think that this is something that's different about the way I've watched you do things over the years.
Yeah, I feel like there's something in this that is like, there's an acknowledgement that there are more variables at play than we might just assume on the surface of things. And I
Right.
think that there's something too in it that there's, if you start paying attention to natural cycles, it's like obviously like things move in patterns and cycles and rhythms, right? But it's very often like that these are not necessarily they're not perfectly consistent. It's not as though like this day on every year is going to be this temperature and this precipitation and all of that, right? But the truth is obviously there's these general patterns and trends, and then there's this wide degree of variation within those general patterns and trends that trigger certain responses from the beings within that ecology. I think about like how like people think about like birds arriving at a certain time of year, and sometimes that can be like super super regular. Like I lived at a place for a few years, and for 3 years in a row there was a pair of hooded orioles that arrived and began nesting in this palm across the street from where I lived. And it was the same day. It was March 26th or 27th. 3 years in a row was the first day that we saw them
Wow.
and heard their call and recognized that they had arrived for the season. But in other times, it's like, the arrival of birds and stuff like that is happening because like the trees are at a certain stage in their offerings of fruit that year, and that is again correlated to precipitation and temperature and all these other things.
Mhm.
So I think that there's just something in that like in herpetoculture we're trying to in order to like be successful culturists, this is the latter half of that term. We need to be successfully replicating these triggers, right? Whatever they may be. And sometimes it's as simple as like, with your North American colubrids, cooling your temperatures for a few months in the winter and then pairing them in the spring, and that's that, and that's easy. But with other things, it can be more nuanced and complex than that. And if you're not considering these other variables in the mix, you might be missing potential patterns that can give you results, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that's a good point. I think there's a lot that we're missing as well, because we're trying to, as keepers, you're trying to replicate all year round, right? And I know that I'm guilty of it, not getting out at all times of the year, because you're not going to find anything, right?
Yeah,
So,
exactly.
but some
There's
of that data,
less motivation.
yeah, to spend all this money to drive down to Southern California to look at rocks and record temperatures, it just appealing, right?
Yeah,
So,
exactly.
but there could be important data there, for sure. Just figuring out. I mean, and you never know what you might find. Um, I know that here locally, here in Colorado, I've seen our little fence lizards, the Scaloporus, active in February with snow on the ground, and they just
Yeah.
happen to be on like a south-facing hill, just kind of barely coming out onto the rocks. But to me, that was a big eye opener. That what else are we missing as far as their
Yeah.
activity throughout the
Yeah,
winter?
totally. Yeah, I've had a similar experience with particularly with rattlesnakes here in Northern California. And I've seen rattlesnakes active every month of the year in this part of California.
Wow.
And we don't typically get snow on the ground except for, the higher elevations where I am, but it does get, below freezing temperatures regularly at night, and, beyond what you would expect them to be active. But I have this recollection of going on a hike with a cousin of mine who was visiting from the UK around the holiday season, around Christmas, and we went on a hike sometime between Christmas and New Year's, and it was an unseasonably sunny day. And on this day, we saw several rattlesnakes out basking near their hibernacula, and we also saw Masticophis lateralis, the chaparral whip snakes, actually emerging from their hibernacula to come out and bask, like
Wow.
single file out of this crack, this fissure in the rock. And that's the last thing I would have expected to see, in late December. But things, they'll take advantage of the conditions, that are available to them.
Yeah.
Right.
That's really cool. Really, really cool. So Nick, if I'm not mistaken, you currently don't actually have anything that you're keeping at the moment. Is that right?
Yeah, for the most part. We do have some ball pythons that we're still trying to get rid of, and we got one African fat-tailed gecko that kind of a pet of the kids. Other than that, yeah, I'm sitting right where there used to be chuckwalla cages. So
Nice.
yeah, we're pretty much out of it.
Would you mind talking a little bit about, or telling us a little bit of the story of what led you to be going from, because you had a very substantial collection, and can you talk a little bit about what led you from that to where you are now?
Yeah, so I mean, I guess it was our choice, right? But there were things that kind of led us down that path,
Yeah.
So I guess some background of that is, I guess sometime a few years back, Colorado decided to change their reptile laws to where, it used to be, nothing non-native was regulated, period. So that was kind of the environment that we were used to operating in. And they changed that to, I guess, kind of follow states like Florida with the invasives, right? So if you really dig into Colorado's reptile laws now, as written, if you really look at the fine print, you're not really allowed to have much of anything. And if they choose to enforce that or not enforce that, it's kind of up to them. So it's being selectively enforced because they've drawn it to say that only animals that are natural breeders, is their term, natural breeders of subtropical and subtropical regions. And further than that, they've redefined, and made their own definition of subtropical to where it's more restrictive than the standard definition. So that actually, if you really read the fine print, that would exclude stuff like bearded dragons, leopard geckos. Obviously, anything North American is out. And yet you see, every day, reptile stores, even PetSmart, Petco, all the corporate places selling rated sliders, which are actually established invasive species here, which is kind of funny. King snakes, corn snakes, bearded dragons, leopard geckos, all stuff that technically is illegal to have, right? So being that we were operating with a fairly large collection and a fairly high profile, that we were pretty easy to track down. So what had happened was somebody had called Fish and Game and said, hey, these people are selling this species or that species. And so that someone had reported us. and we know who it is.
Mhm.
It's actually a rival crotophytus breeder who we'd had run-ins with, and Phil knows all the history, and
Oh yeah.
Mhm.
Phil's had issues with the guy too. But essentially the guy was just trying to take us out,
Mhm.
anyway, make it difficult to operate any way he could. So uh, uh, they came knocking on the door and started questioning us about what we had, what we were selling, that kind of thing. Um, and really, I think they were only interested in a couple species, but when Austin started kind of talking back and forth with them, kind of asking, well, what about this species? What about this species? Usually, if you ask a government agent like that, for permission, usually they're going to say no, right?
Yeah.
So,
Mhm.
um, so we're going down the list of stuff that we were keeping, and they were saying, no, you can't have that, can't have that, can't have that.
Wow.
Like I said, at the same time, you drive across town and you can find 18 of the things for sale elsewhere, on public display. So,
Mhm.
it was there was a discrepancy in the enforcement, and you know we really didn't want to drag it out and make a big legal thing of it. We were
Mhm.
at a point where we kind of um, we had maintained such a big collection for so long that it becomes taxing.
Mhm.
You can't go on vacations without finding someone trustworthy to watch the zoo. And we only had Phil and another friend that were able and willing and that we trusted to watch everything. So, you can't get out and do the things that you really want to do. So we were at a point where we were ready to get out, to step away.
Mhm.
Mhm.
And so I think this is worth kind of getting into and talking a little bit more
Mhm.
about because um this is something that all of us, we talk so often on the show about the ways in which we need to protect our ability to keep what we keep and the ways that we need to pay attention to the way that legislation and um, even government overreach, et cetera, can kind of interfere with our industry. And I feel like the stuff that kind of happened with you really was like it seemed like you were sort of being made an example of in a way, and some of it, I feel like probably nothing would have happened, and you might still be keeping everything had this one sort of disgruntled competitor who's working with all the same animals, doing all the same things you were, hadn't decided to get extremely upset about meaningless shit and kind of
Mhm.
call you out and kind of single you out as a criminal. And we talked a lot about the possibility of fighting it.
Mhm.
And so I know obviously you guys decided not to, and I understand. It makes sense. I'm not it's certainly not a criticism. I mean, you have a family, you guys have a whole other life that you're doing. But can you talk a little bit about like what went into your thinking rather about, whether or not to fight it further and why?
Well, I mean, so really, it was a stressful situation. Especially for Austin. Um, she really didn't want to make a big,
Hmm.
uh, drawn out legal thing of it. I was fairly certain we could have fought it, but it's going to cost a lot of money. It's going to
Yeah.
take a lot of time, and is it really worth the stress? At that point. So we decided to
Mhm.
just kind of, you know, scale back and just not make a big fight of it, right? Um, Went the low stress route, I guess, the easiest,
Hmm.
quickest and easiest
Yeah.
route.
Yeah.
Um, but really, in hindsight, I think we could have fought it. I think there's a lot there. First of all, in the there are contradictions in the in the law, right? So they say specifically that they list different families as being non-regulated. So Crotophytidae, Iguanidae, those are both on there. So what makes them regulated all of a sudden,
Right.
right? So despite the species, because we were working with Colaris, which is native, but we did have paperwork stating that they'd come, the breeding stock had come from other states legally. Some even we even had some imported from Europe, so
Right.
that were like color morphs. So I mean, it's not like we're going, which there aren't any on this side of the state anyway, but it's not like we're driving out and collecting and selling. We have documentation with very distinct color phases that were being sold, that had traceable lineages. But that's absolutely no different than, say, working with an albino California king snake.
Right.
The species itself is technically native to Colorado, but you see them for sale everywhere.
Right.
Right.
Because it's something that's a little bit different from what's here, and the lineage can be traced back to, whatever breeder.
Right. And it's not just cow kings, right? There's other stuff too.
Yeah. There's a lot of other species that are, like I said, the red-eared sliders are now invasive in Colorado, and they're still being sold in pet stores. I want to say that there's actually people selling bull snake morphs with pretty much with permission from Fish and Game. Depending on how you divide up Pantherophis, the corn snakes and the Emery's rat snakes, Great Plains rat snakes. Those are native as well, depending on how you divide that little group up.
Yeah.
But there's definitely others, and other stuff on that list that they say geographically isn't permitted to be here, because all they look at is the latitude. They're not looking at like elevation, habitat, moisture or anything like that. It's just kind of just blanket laws.
Yeah. And there's other discrepancies too, like the fact that so the governing bodies have come to my place to do yearly inspections, and one of the things that they cited was that there's no rear fanged allowed here in terms of keeping. So I was forced to get rid of my tricolor hogs that I had years ago. However, the technical jargon's supposed to say, oh, it's no venomous reptiles, and yet people are technically okay to keep Heloderma.
Yeah.
Because not only are there breeders of Heloderma here, but they're in the pet shops as well.
Yeah.
And it's totally above board somehow, even though that's a venomous reptile. It's just not a venomous snake,
Right.
So it's so strange. It's weird. And I don't know, not necessarily trying to turn this into a political discussion or anything like that, but it is strange the way some of these policies come down, specifically with regard to exotic animals and venomous animals.
Yeah, it's not always based on anything logical. It's just whatever sounds good to them. And I'm glad you brought up the Heloderma, because that was a good analog for our situation. And we didn't really want to bring it up because we didn't want to start pointing fingers. That was one of our big things about fighting, is how do you make a case for yourself without trying to point fingers at other people who are doing the same stuff, and then you're naming people that could also be getting in trouble.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Because as you know, like one of the biggest breeders of Gila monsters, Dr. Mark Seward, he's in the state.
Yep.
And he has been for a very long time, and he's not really operating under any secrecy. But how is a Gila monster any different than chuckwallas or collared lizards?
Totally. It's exactly the same. Yeah.
Occupies almost the same range even. Yeah. Yeah, that's really an example of like a pretty ineffectual and lopsided legislation, unfortunately.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. I think it's going to have to be I guess, talked about and fought, as far as like trying to maybe get them to change things, write it a little bit more logically.
Mm.
Mhm.
I think it's the way that it's written, they can pretty much crack down on anybody for almost anything in the hobby. Unfortunately,
Mhm.
maybe that's how they want it, but really, like logically, if you're looking at it, uh, to prevent invasive species from getting a foothold, then they're really going way above and beyond. I mean, if they're more restrictive than Florida, then there's
Yeah.
there's an issue, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I-
Yeah. I'm curious. I mean, I don't want to maybe prematurely pivot us away from this aspect of it, but I'm curious, just like on kind of a more personal level, like for you, like what are the aspects of herpetoculture that you miss, being on kind of the other side of it? And are there aspects that feel liberating, or do you see yourself ever returning to herpetoculture in some capacity? I'm kind of curious about that, if you'd be willing to share.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, for the most part, it is kind of liberating. It is really, uh, it's a huge weight being lifted off your shoulders, not having to wake up every morning, like clockwork, and you got a schedule to keep. You got to keep, you know, uh, feed and clean and collect eggs and all that stuff. It's a lot of work, and we had built such a big collection that it was, for 10 months out of the year, really a lot of work every day. So
Mhm.
I really don't miss that. It is nice, not having that, not having that,
Mhm.
but I do miss. At the same time, you do kind of miss the routine. Um, you miss. I miss all the projects that we used to have. You know, I guess without it's definitely a very conflicting situation, right? Because you don't miss them, but at the same time, there are times when you really do miss doing what you were doing.
Mm.
Uh,
Mhm.
so I guess maybe I wouldn't rule out returning someday.
Mhm.
Probably not to the same scale, but maybe pick up a few projects that we worked with previously.
Yeah.
Maybe wanted to continue furthering the project, or seeing some results that we didn't get to see through. Uh,
Mhm.
finish some unfinished business, so to speak.
Hmm.
Yeah, totally. I kind of had that feeling when I kind of I took a 10-year hiatus from herpetoculture, and through my 20s basically, and came back um somewhat recently, and had a similar kind of feeling about it. Like the initial feeling in a lot of ways was kind of relief and liberation. And it also kind of coincided with the time in my life too, where that made a lot of sense, where I was kind of exiting my teens and entering young adulthood, and wanted to be kind of footloose and fancy free and careless. And but yeah, coming back to it, there was definitely a feeling of like, okay, there's unfinished business with certain like, taxa that have just been there in some back chamber of my brain for the last decade,
Uh,
kind of
Yeah.
working on me a little bit. And yeah, so I can really relate to that feeling.
yeah,
And sorry, go ahead, Nick. Sorry.
no, that's all right. Go ahead.
So, because on this same topic, this is something I'm really curious about, because now that you're you're currently not really keeping, other than the stuff that's left that you're still trying to find homes for, are there any, like, because you're removed from it, are there like
Mm.
any blind spots or criticisms about herpetoculture broadly that you maybe didn't notice before because you were so deeply ingrained, or perhaps stuff that you feel more comfortable kind of airing out about now that you're not like intimately involved?
Yeah, I guess there's been a little bit of things that here and there that I've noticed. One of the things that kind of really hit close to home was, and this was actually before we got out, is specifically with like Dickersone, right?
Mhm.
So you're keeping and breeding them, and part of your um, promoting your business, being able to sell babies, you have to kind of create a little bit of interest, right? So you see a lot of people sharing pictures on social media, and so this creates demand. Everybody wants this awesome looking animal, right? And so demand is going to, inspire people to go out and get the animal, legal or not, right? So what I saw was, we worked very hard with some European imported animals to try and get the Dickersons up to a viable size project where we could start selling some babies and such. But in that time, there was a lot of interest being generated. And sure enough, I think it was 2020, 2019, you start seeing a bunch of people show up with wild caught animals, like obvious wild caught animals. So, I mean, I've been catching crotophytus for 20 years. So a wild caught one sticks out like a sore thumb as compared to a captive bred one.
Oh yeah.
But you start seeing the Mexican species start showing up in the trade very heavily. And, part of me kind of feels a little guilty. We bear some responsibility for kind of fueling that interest, right? At least that's kind of how I felt. It's hard to really figure out how you could get a balance between, sharing pictures of the animals and promoting them, true captive bred animals. And at the same time, you're trying to fight smuggling and the illegal collection of them. But so that's one thing. I guess going back to the poison dart frog hobby, that's one thing that they do pretty well and I think it probably, once the prices drop low enough, it's not worth the smuggler's time or effort to go and collect them. So, but we never got that far with the crotophytus. They were still pretty rare.
What are some of the ways that, so it's actually a great time to circle back to the dart frog community, because you mentioned that being something that you found somewhat inspirational in a way, and you felt like there was a lot that within the dart frog community that you felt was a great model or example for other aspects of herpetoculture. Can you talk about what some of those things are and why you think they're valuable?
Yeah, so I guess part of that, kind of along that same line of thought, is that they've actually worked with a lot of these conservation organizations in the country of origin, where they're truly, and it's not just a BS farm bred label that you see on like a price list, right? This is like a real farm.
You mean on a Euromastix?
Yeah, farm bred. Yeah, the farm out in Egypt. So they have real farms where they actually, the country of origin allows them to go out and collect breeding stock, here and there, small numbers, in sustainable numbers, right? And they've got a facility there in country, and they breed, and they have a lot of success. They breed the crap out of these frogs, and then they package up a big group for export. They export them, and if you have the right person on the other end who's kind of doing the same thing, like from a sustainability standpoint, keeping detailed records, that's another big thing, and breeding large numbers of them for export or distribution further down the line. So instead of just going straight to the end consumer, you got somebody who's kind of a steward for ensuring that this species gets a foothold in the hobby, right? So, but that's gone on in several of these countries with regards to dart frogs. So I know Peru, Colombia, Costa Rica. I've been out of the dart frog game for probably about 10 or 12 years. So I'm sure that there's a lot more going on with that than I'm aware of. But yeah, other than that, they're very good about quarantine procedures because of the chytrid fungus. So being very, very rigid protocols where it comes to testing, quarantining all of your imported animals, or all of your animals, period, have to go through all this this protocol. Trying to think of other good stuff.
Well, I also think that a lot of dart frog keepers are they're just doing a better job. I mean, I don't mean to be too blunt about it, but you don't see a lot of people getting dart frogs and keeping them in shit conditions. It's,
Yeah.
or at least I don't think so. I mean, I know it's out there, I'm sure, but I mean, some of that's got to be just because you kind of can't. Like, it's just, right? Like, I'd imagine some of them just don't do well in
Yeah.
poor conditions, right?
Yeah, there's a lot smaller margin for error with something that delicate.
And what do you think some of the reasons are behind that? Do you think it's just local law and regulation? Do you think it's a different perspective on the animal as a resource than in other countries? Or what do you think are some of the contributing factors?
I'm not really sure. I think it's probably looking at it from a conservation standpoint, and you have that need, but it's also probably fueled by at least some of the species and some of the locales, fueled by fighting smugglers. Well, there was I don't know if you've ever heard the joke when it was an old dart frogger joke where what happens when they discover a new species of dart frog? Oh, it's that flapping noise you hear, right? And they said the flapping noise is the German passports getting stamped, right? So,
Yeah, exactly.
But yeah, I probably butchered it, but that was the thing. Like, you could get almost anything. At least when I was keeping dart frogs, they had everything in Germany, stuff that you couldn't find elsewhere, right? And they still have a lot of that stuff in Europe where American keepers aren't allowed to have it, but they're easy to keep, easy to breed, and they're all over in Europe. But really, this a lot of these projects were kind of made to combat that that mindset where they were making local populations go extinct, or species where they're almost getting wiped out by smugglers.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those things where I wish, because this kind of came up also in our last conversation with Jordan. He was mentioning ways in which the rise in popularity of a given animal kind of led to, because we typically think of, you hear, oh, as soon as you prohibit the keeping of a species or an animal, you incentivize a black market, right? Which is obviously true. That happens all the time. But then you don't hear as much about the way that an increase in popularity of a species can also increase that illicit trafficking of said animal. And I'll be the first to admit, I honestly don't know much at all about the dart frog community because I've never participated in it. I've never kept, other than a few times occasionally, sort of peripherally, I've never really kept dart frogs myself. But I deeply admire that capacity for, certain countries of origin to say, all right, we understand that there's a demand for these things. So we're gonna set up legal means for keeping, right? And legal means for meeting the demand of the captive industry. That is, I think, an excellent response to the popularity and the preservation of a certain group of animals. I think Australia, and hopefully, maybe if we have any, I doubt it, but if we have any Australian listeners, perhaps they'll correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm fairly sure that it is totally okay. They're allowed to keep native animals as pets. And I think that's really cool. I love the idea that I might be able to go out into my backyard, well, not literally my backyard, but my metaphorical backyard, and find some incredible collared lizards or hognose snakes or plains milks and breed them and then provide that for people and say, all right, look, we know there's going to be a demand for these animals here. Great. Let's do this in a way that makes sense, that gives people what they want, but makes an effort to protect the natural population as best we can. Because it seems like outright banning it and outright allowing any level of collection, also, those both seem to present problems. So, it's sort of it's a challenging problem, and it's cool to see the ways in which you think that the I mean, I feel like that could be applied to so many different animals in herpetoculture, don't you?
Oh yeah, for sure. There's, you know, almost limitless potential there. And being that it's worked in other countries with other species, it could be, just mimic that model, and it could really apply to a lot of different animals, and it would probably help everybody.
Yeah. Well, I mean,
Yeah, I think that um there's just a lot of potential there, for both countries of origin and obviously the export countries too, to have there's just a missed opportunity in a lot of ways. I mean, of course, there's a ton of infrastructure required and regulatory bodies required and stuff like that that may or may not exist currently. But I think that you make a good point in just like these models put forth by the dart frog community with some of these countries, how they've been able to do it. And I think that, I mean, of course, you're not going to be eliminating illicit trade entirely, but I think that
how can you?
there has been a reduction. Exactly. You can't. I mean, how can you? But you can create a reduction. And the reality is that, like, I think that most people would rather go through legitimate channels to, meet this demand,
Right.
than end up with something that they can't post on their Instagram, because that's what it's all about these days.
Yeah. Well, I mean, if you have these legitimate organizations that everybody knows they can get a competitively priced animal from, captive bred and of legitimate origin, why would somebody risk going to prison for smuggling, right? Like $100 frog or $125 frog versus black market, 15, 20 years ago, it would have been, in the thousands of dollars per frog. That's made a huge difference right there, right? Just the price and the availability.
Mm-hmm.
And like I said, from the farm, from the country of origin, if they're doing everything right, and whoever's receiving them to distribute them is doing everything right and breeding them, then that alone is enough. But I guess Understory Enterprises in Canada, they're kind of who I'm talking about as kind of that middleman, but they've organized a lot of this stuff as well. So they take the stuff from the farms and they establish big breeding groups, and then from there, they're regularly producing and exporting large numbers of frogs. So if you have a good enough infrastructure and everyone's doing what they can do as efficiently as possible, then that pretty much eliminates the need for poaching entirely.
Well, and there's also weird out of balance priorities and leeways, right? So what I mean by that is, Nick, you and I both have talked about this before, but we know specific stretches of road that have been developed in both Arizona, Southern California, where the number of animals that were either displaced or outright killed or destroyed as a result of that development would have been beyond sufficient for establishing a captive population that could have satisfied more than the demand. And yet there's no penalty for the elimination of not just animals, but native habitat. And yet somehow small scale collection to meet small scale demand, especially, I mean, even just for animals, like I have a photo hanging on my wall that you gave me as a gift, Nick, of a Crotophytus vestigium basking on a stone under a tree in Southern California. It's a great photo. But when I think of both Crotophytus vestigium and Crotophytus reticulatus, those two animals are animals that have tiny ranges within the United States, very narrow habitat margins. And there's no, I mean, obviously maybe for South Mountain with carrot-tailed chucks, maybe for some of the range for reticulate collards. But other than that, it's not exactly protected you can develop those areas. You can build homes there. You know, there's nothing stopping anybody from saying, I got a bunch of money. Let's go ahead and make some profit, baby. It's like, how is that okay? Because that's exploitative as well. That takes not just the animals, but the habitat also. That's, if anything, that's doubly problematic, right?
Right.
And this isn't something that's discussed, I think.
Right. Yeah, you bring up some good points. That's one of my big gripes, right? Because I've seen it happen in real time. So specifically with California, no offense, Roy, but
Roy
they're
lives in the UK, okay? Roy is in a trailer park in the UK. We've been over this.
Okay.
I'm just kidding.
So fringe toe lizards. So specifically, the Colorado desert fringe toe lizard, Uma notata, I believe. We used to keep them. They used to be part of our little stop on the desert trips, and occasionally we'd pick up a pair, which was what the license in California allowed, right? You'd get 2 animals, you'd go take them home, you breed them, and you'd sell your babies for, cricket money. So it's not like a big illicit black market thing going on. But 2013, I believe, those became listed as a so they're not protected. They're not a species of special concern, threatened, endangered, anything like that. The Coachella Valley fringe toe lizards are, but the other 2 species in California are not. They moved them to a different list, just zero bag limit, right? So you can no longer collect them. But in that time period, you see expansion of recreational areas in their habitat where people, you have off-road vehicles all over the place, tearing up the habitat, running them over. Development of large solar farms, where what you were talking about with thousands of acres being sterilized essentially of all of the lizards and reptiles, everything. That's okay, right? But 2 dudes from Colorado can't come down and collect a pair each to have as pets. So there's definitely a lot of work to be done with a lot of states and a lot of governments to try and get them on the same page. And I think US ARC is trying to fight that battle right now with diamondback terrapins in Florida, right? Trying to maintain the ability of Florida keepers to do kind of the same approach where they're allowed to collect a few animals for breeding stock and supply the demand of the pet trade with their animals captive bred. But I don't know all the details about that. I just heard a little bit about it.
Yeah. Roy, I think you're muted, homie.
Sorry, gentlemen. Yeah, I
Okay.
turned on my mute because my wolf dog was just howling a minute ago, so I wasn't sure how loud it was. But
would have been a great background
anyway.
noise.
Yeah, it could have been nice, but I wasn't sure.
But
yeah, I think that there's something about all of this that it's like it's not as though widespread habitat destruction legitimizes the illicit trade.
No.
Like I think that it's important to make that distinction. I know that's not what anyone's saying here.
Sure.
But I think that some people could, I have heard people make that argument, within herpetoculture, that it's like, well, the habitat's getting destroyed anyway, so we may as well. And in some level, I'm sympathetic to that. But at the same time, it's like, it does illuminate this this total folly. We were just talking about this with Philippe Devogely when we spoke to him, and he's talking about how, Brazil, no export of wildlife, no quota, but has destroyed millions of acres of rainforest, and is rapidly just the machine is just consuming what's remaining, of the natural habitat there. And who knows how many species, in that region, arguably the most biodiverse place on the planet, it's very likely the entire species have just vanished in that process. Potentially some that we, have never been described, that we don't know anything about. I also think about what is the harm caused by the loss of biodiversity. And it's like, well, the reality is that like biodiversity is the reservoir that creates resilience for all life. It's like, I think we've talked about this before, that like if you have diseases emerging, so do their counterpoints, like that within biodiversity lies our capacity to be resilient, and I think that you see that too, even in just California is a great example, to pick on California some more, which is
Do it.
I'm happy to do, because I work in like the kind of ecology field here, and California is an ecological disaster. It's a total shit show.
Yeah.
And in a lot of ways. And we can't even begin to fathom like the actual long-term impacts of the loss of biodiversity that we've seen in California yet, because it's still so recent.
Yeah.
It's like there's just so much hubris in all of that. And I think that herpetoculture, we were just speaking earlier today with Jordan Russell about this, and it's like, I think that herpetoculture has a role to play potentially in conservation, in supporting habitat preservation and conservation in these areas. And herpetoculturists and herpers, field herpers alike can play a role in that too, in identifying, this is an area or a place where a sensitive species actually occurs in decent numbers. A lot of these people that are, making approvals for these developments and stuff like that have no idea what's there.
No clue.
They don't care at all. It's like, I've seen it, here in my home county, Sonoma County, we have an endemic subspecies of the California tiger salamander.
Nice.
And there's amazing, beautiful black and white polka dotted big old ambistamids, really cool salamanders.
Sick.
And you'd never know that they're there most of the time, because most of the year they're underground, right, in rodent burrows and stuff like that. But then you get these fall rains and they emerge in droves and do their migrations. And it's a constant battle, for development in the last remaining, there's 1% probably of their native breeding grounds remaining, of their remaining vernal pools that they require for breeding. That might be an exaggeration, but it's not far off. It's a very low percentage of their remaining habitat, and they're still pushing to develop, and
Crazy.
it's just it's especially hard, I think, to advocate for non-charismatic, so to speak, species like herpetofauna, and yet like there's potential in numbers. If we can somehow find a way to be a bit more of a unified front in advocating for these things that we care about, maybe there's something there.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's very challenging. It's excuse me. Sorry. I think it's challenging to want to see more pragmatism in policy and common sense. And I feel like it's very difficult. I feel like this resonates quite a bit with parts of the conversation we were having with Jordan about the ways that we need to be able to do better and try to set a better example for the future. It's a lot. It's a real challenge. But with sorry, go ahead. Oh.
No, go ahead. I was just agreeing. Yeah.
Okay, cool. Just wanted to make sure I didn't cut you off. So I'd like to change just briefly shift gears for a moment, and then there's a few sort of like wrap up questions that I have for you, Nick, too. But I'd really like to just talk for a few minutes about some fun field herping stories, because I feel like we have a few of those. So I know the one we mentioned with the male Baja getting out, that's not a field herping story. But I feel like it sort of leads into some of them. What you've done so much field herping over the years. I mean, can you tell us a little bit about what you love about it and what like, you know, just what you love about field herping in general?
You know, it's I guess it's going back to the childhood memories of just getting out and going and seeing what you can find, you know, see what you can turn up. Kind of that little bit of a sense of adventure.
Mhm.
And being an adult and being able to make your own travel arrangements and go for extended periods of time definitely helps amplify that, right? But really it's like whatever you dream of doing, you just go out and you do it. And you know, whatever species captured your imagination here or there, you go look for it, see what you can figure out.
Yeah,
That's one of the coolest things.
yeah. And it's pretty remarkable because when you took me field herping for the first time, I remember the first time we spotted a wild Baja. And I remember because it was Spider-Man, right?
Yep.
And I remember you spent 10 minutes trying to point to the damn rock where this fucking collared lizard was. And I was just like, I don't see it. I can't see it. I didn't see it until you had noosed it. You know? Excuse me. Sorry.
Takes a
Yeah,
little bit.
there's something about that. Yeah. You know, the developing the herping lens. I used to joke about that with some friends and go out hiking or something like that, and I'd stop and be like, all right, how many lizards do you guys see right now?
Right.
And they'll go, what are you talking about? I don't see any. And I'll be like, all right, well, there are 12. And I'll
Yeah,
point them all out. And they're like, what? How do you see all these things?
yeah. So yeah, so without trying to put you directly on the spot, what are some of the most what are some of the most memorable like field herping moments for you?
Oh man. Um that is putting me on the spot, man. There's so many memories.
Yeah. So many thoughts are flooding through my mind right now, you know. It's
I think
recording over.
the Dickersonian in Mexico, that was really cool. So Austin and I, we drove down there, we camped on the beach, and we were hunting for Dickersons and trying to find some and get some good pictures. A little bit in the afternoon, and then the next morning before we took off. But we were able to see a few animals, and that was a really cool experience. Let's see. You know, it's always fun. It's always fun going out there with you, Phil.
Yeah. I think a lot about that leopard lizard we saw chasing the zebra tail.
Yeah, that was cool. But you know, like I said, so many memories, man, that you know, you forget about a lot of the little things in the moment. But
Yeah.
that was really cool. Um, Roy, so we were hiking up a wash, and so this is in California. I guess I never plan on seeing leopard lizards except for maybe like a couple places, right? And they're usually
Mhm.
lower elevation. So this was over 2,000 feet in elevation, and
Oh,
we're
wow.
hiking this wash, and we see this zebra tail lizard just coming straight for us at full speed.
It's
And
coming right for
yeah,
us.
right behind it was a huge leopard lizard, and the leopard lizard chases it into this little hole underneath of the rock at the bank. And I guess we never saw what happened to that little pursuit, but
No.
pretty cool situation.
Yeah. It's fun stuff. Yeah, I guess I did. That was kind of a rough thing. I did kind of put you on the spot there.
Well, I have a kind of related question, which is like, are there any kind of like field herping targets that you've had that have just like eluded you? Like, do you have a field herping white whale out there remaining?
Um, I mean, as far as things that I've looked for,
Mhm.
I would say the Bajas really they gave me hell, like I said, for a few. There was a few years when I was trying to get back into them. You know,
Mhm.
I was going out probably twice a year, and just I'd see maybe a couple animals, and just wasn't having luck catching them. Wasn't seeing that many. Um, but you know, once things turned around, and I kind of figured out, I guess, better times of the year to go, better places to
Mhm.
go, things really turned around. But you know, I'm probably not alone in this either. I've dreamed about it. You know, finding a Bogertophus in Southern California.
Oh yeah. That's a grail status find right there for
Yeah.
sure.
Wait, remind me
Yeah.
remind me what that is.
The
Uh,
Baja rat snake.
yeah.
Oh yes,
Yeah,
that's
yeah.
right.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's a really obscure one.
Them or the Coleonyx Switaki
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
barefoot geckos.
Yeah.
Mhm.
I know that we've been through some of those areas, and I've never seen one. So
Those are
uh,
beautiful as well.
yeah, that'd be really cool to see. Um,
Whoa, what was that?
oh, that was moose.
Oh,
Moose shaking.
Moose.
There's a
There he
dog shake
is.
right there.
I forgot he's a giant animal. Look at that guy. His head's bigger than yours.
He's been quietly sleeping this whole time.
Oh, Moose.
Is he a Great Dane?
Yep.
Fucking monster dog. Oh man, that's excellent stuff. Well,
Yeah. Well,
so okay, so then I guess this is kind of like a maybe this is like the question that we like to try to end the shows with, because it's kind of become like a bit of a show tradition. We've had a couple where we've had one so far, where the one with Philippe, where we didn't even answer, or didn't even bother to ask him the question, because it felt like the whole show was like, this is why, you know, we don't, the whole show was about the question somehow.
Yeah. Yeah.
But so tell me, Nick, if someone asked you why herpetoculture, why? What's the point? Why do we do this? What's the, you know, and you could take that as broadly or specifically as you like, but you know, let's ruminate on this a little bit.
I'd have to say, you know, it's about the connection with nature. Um,
Hmm.
you're taking a little piece of it, whether you're literally taking it from from nature and putting it in your house, or you're just getting something that you imagine. You know, you can imagine it in its habitat in nature, and you know, you're doing what you can with it, trying your hand, putting your influence on it, maybe putting a little bit of a signature on it as far as people breeding, um, you know, breeding stuff. You kind of want to make it your own,
Hmm.
however you can, make it kind of unique, unique to you. So whatever project you choose, that's kind of what it's about for me. You know, just taking it and making it your own, kind of. Um, I guess kind of similar to you know, bonsai. You know, what's the point? You have a little tree
Mhm.
growing in a dish, right? So
Hmm.
like, what's the point, right? But it's about you know, finding enjoyment in doing what you're doing to it, and you're making the decisions, right? You're um, just making it your own.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh man, Moose, he's really getting involved. Hey,
Yeah.
Moose,
Yeah, look at that cameo here.
he's huge. I've seen Moose in person, Roy. He is an absolute giant of a dog. Like, I've never seen a dog that big before in my life.
What does he weigh?
Um, about 185 ish. It's been a
Oh
while
yeah,
since
so
I weighed him.
he's bigger
Jesus.
than me by a pretty significant margin there.
Yeah. What, really? What do you weigh, Roy?
I weigh like 165, 175, somewhere in that range.
Holy smokes. Okay, yes.
Yeah.
Moose makes you look a little small.
Yeah,
That's
I'm kind of scrawny.
He's
oh
a big
man,
guy.
a big fella. Wow. Okay. Well, shit. I think that's excellent stuff, man. I love that answer. The connection with nature is that's to me, that's what it's all about in a lot of ways, you know, just Roy and I have ruminated on this before on the show where I use that word too much probably, but
Good word.
it's a good word. It's great. You know, but I feel like in so many ways, we are increasingly disconnected from nature and the natural world. And herpetoculture seems to be one way of being a bit of a salve for that ill,
Mhm.
you know. And you know, I at least speaking for myself anyway, Nick, I hope you don't, I hope you find your way back at least at some point, you know.
Yeah, I think it's something you're kind of born with, right?
Yeah,
I can't
Yeah.
I can't really get away from it. I still think about it. I still dream about it.
yeah. You still
It's
follow
fun.
all those pages, you know,
That's right.
watching what everybody's up to.
Yeah, I'm still planning trips, so
Yeah.
I got
Yeah.
an open schedule next year, Phil.
Yeah, we'll make it happen. Yeah, I nothing would make me happier than making another trip here soon. I wasn't able to go out this year at all,
Yeah, me neither.
except out east to the plains here in Colorado. But yeah, we'll make something happen. And uh, you know, the other thing, there was one other thing there. I actually just lost it, but I'm gonna forgive me. I'm gonna stop the recording really quick.